Film Study Part 2. In this video, we want to pick up where we left off, and we're going to add some more details. In this video, we're going to pick up the physical cues, but we're also going to pay attention to some internal cues that might be a little bit more emotional. And we want to get started early because we don't want to go back and do a whole separate series on some of the non-verbal the non-action cues, you know what I mean? Like, we want to try to interpret some of these emotions, like the way my fighter right here is pacing back and forth inside of the cage, how the other fighter receives his name as he's being introduced to the crowd. These are little cues that give you subtle hints about what's going on inside their head, but mainly we want to pay attention to, in the physical sense, what stance does each fighter favor? All right, is he southpaw, orthodox? Is he a switch hitter? We also want to pay attention to what targets does each fighter chase down over and over and over during a round, during the entire fight. Again, start with the basics, watch the entire video. Watch the entire round. If it only goes one round, if it's only 2 rounds, watch both rounds. If it's only 3 rounds, watch all the rounds. You'll start to see some commonalities, some repeats. Watch where they fight. The distance has been closed in this particular situation, so we know whether they end up on the ground or not, that at least one person feels more comfortable the closer he is to his opponent. And as we're paying attention on the ground in terms of like stances for the stand-up, we want to look at grappling positions. So is the opponent predominantly on his back or predominantly on top in relationship to his opponent? Is he side mount? Is he north-south? We pay attention to these nuances because people putting themselves in back positions usually are skilled. People who stay calm in back positions usually are skilled. That means that they've, been there for some time due to grappling competitions, or it's just how they train in the fight. Also, pay attention to fighters who are calm when their backs are against the cage, and pay attention to, do they have skill to reverse the situation? So again, it goes back to location of the fight. This is all location, and the mental aspect of it starts to creep in. And sometimes, remember Anderson Silva would back up sometimes and still win engagements from a fighter. Pay attention to the fighter who's in the perceivably negative position but is winning. That's something else you want to watch out for. Again, these are just little notes you jot down or mental notes you take, because you're going to come back and put a whole picture together, and you're going to make a strong evaluation of the opponent, And in this situation right here, look for mistakes. There may be somewhere the guy on the bottom was doing well in terms of striking from the clinch, but his takedown game from the body lock position, not so much. All right. But he was doing fine earlier when attacking from the waist and below to the legs. And again, pay attention to the activity in each range. The more hectic and helter-skelter that activity is, they may be uncomfortable there. Here in this situation, White is throwing body kicks and then swings to an armbar. To me, that denotes some comfortability in that position. He seems to be calm, and he's attacked the body with his heel, he's attacked the arm, he's attacked the face with his fist, and he's attempting a transition, gets his back taken temporarily. But my point is that he's on the attack. He attacked different targets. So this might not be the guy that I would want to engage on the ground, because even if I was in a dominant position, he feels comfortable there. I don't want to fight this guy in his comfort zone, you know, because he might actually be better than me there. You know, just because you temporarily have an advantage doesn't mean you know how to use that advantage. And this is something you need to be aware of in your training. So when watching film, don't just take these casual words like, oh, I would never make that mistake. You know, the reason you're watching film is because you're trying to come to a conclusion about 90%, 85% really, of what you can do to secure victory. But there's still that wiggle room of about 15%. And one of the things here in this situation, what I pay attention to is the body lock. You know, when I see him hit that body lock, I'm like, okay, this guy kind of knows what he's doing. You know, stuck up against the cage. It's hard for his opponent to get out. So you can tell that he's comfortable fighting off his back just by what we saw earlier. So pay attention to, you know, in the stand-up, what stances they want to use, southpaw, orthodox, or they switch a lot. And when they're on the ground, pay attention to them particularly fighting off the back, because the back is usually represented as the most negative position. And when their back's up against the cage, pay attention to how calm they are in these positions. And in some cases, you pay attention to who strikes first. Other little things you pay attention to are things that you will find about the fighter, like the age of the fighter, how many fights the fighter has had, how much experience the fighter has had in other martial arts, training as well as competition. So these things will also aid the situation in terms of making a strong evaluation. And although they don't make a direct impact upon how I view footage and how I get an understanding of how the fight may or may not go, I still, you know, again, jot them down, make some mental notes, and I look at the size of the athlete, especially when there's an age difference. Sometimes an older fighter will meet or compete in a certain weight class, but it's not the weight class that he would have naturally competed in had he been a little younger, because as you get a little older, you know, it's hard to train and cut weight, especially when you have a full day of activities like another job, a family, you know, and other responsibilities. You just can't train that way to cut the weight. So, you know, the younger fighter might end up being slightly bigger in that weight class because he's younger for one, more fit. His frame is built for it, you know. And so these are things you pay attention to because they will impact a fight. You know, you don't want to get into a slam dunk contest with Shaquille O'Neal, not prime Shaquille O'Neal anyway. So these are things that you have to have in the back of your mind. So again, going back to the original video, we pay attention to where the fight happens. What is the overall fighting style of the individuals? And basically, you know, who can impose their will on the other guy. And then in this video, we're looking at their stances and their positions. You know, who's able to get to their position first? Who's able to execute? What targets do they chase? You know, the more diverse the target, the more difficult it is to deal with that particular opponent. And that's because you have to defend from so many different areas. You have to defend in so many different ways. So you have to pay attention to all these factors when watching a fight. And again, with the emotional aspect, look at the emotional release. You know, this fighter may have been taking on a huge task leading up to this event. You know, just pay attention to how much energy that fighter is releasing after the fight. This might be something you could use to actually get him to spend more energy, because he's putting a lot of pressure on himself to perform at a high level. But basically, that's all I have right now in terms of just adding part two study. Again, paying attention to some minor mental cues, and then looking at the basic footwork positions that they start from. And then when they're on the ground, pay attention to, especially the guys who like to go to their back. I'm not so worried about the top guys, because you're kind of going to get that split. They're either going to want to be on top or they're comfortable on their back. So pay attention to that. It's very important. And don't take these guys for granted. I am Coach Sess, and you've had words with the Mad Coach.